Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. In a previous video I shared with you that I love Eastern philosophy and that I have been studying it for a little bit over 20 years. One of my first experiences of Eastern philosophy was a reading of the Bhagavad Gita, which has been translated sometimes as the Celestial Song or the Song of the Lord. This remains one of the most beautiful, I would say, and one of the most influential reading experiences of my entire life. So for that reason, I wanted to share with you some thoughts on the Gita and also at the same time to urge you to read this amazing and enriching text. By the way, Jorge Luis Borges was a big fan of the Bhagavad Gita, and there's going to be, as a result, a Borges connection coming up. So I just wanted to let you know about that before we start exploring the actual text. So the Gita dates from around 500 BC. That is one of the dates that we have. And the literal meaning, as I said before, is the song of the Lord, the song of heaven, the celestial song, the song of the blessed Lord. There are many translations of the title only, so you can tell by that that this is a complex text. I think it's important to keep in mind that the Gita is a section of the vast epic poem Mahabharata. So in a way, I would say that all of us who have read it have done so out of context. But that is not tremendously important for many reasons that we're going to explore in this video. The original text is in Sanskrit, and actually the first translation from Sanskrit into English ever of any text at all was a translation of the Bhagavad Gita back in the year 1785. So this is a very important text that we are dealing with here. The Gita is considered to be one of the central texts of Hinduism, along with the Vedas, along with the Upanishads, and many others. So that's just a little bit of context in which to approach this text. Let's look a little bit at genre now, okay? So if we go by the title, Bhagavad Gita, this is a song. It is a poem. Now, because it consists mainly of a dialogue between two characters, and one of the main topics of that dialogue is the best way to live one's life, you can also read this text as a philosophical text, and of course, obviously, as a religious text, as a sacred text. That is how I choose to read it, but there are many ways that you can approach this infinite text. It is also an excellent allegory. Okay, so that's another genre that I always like to keep in mind when I read the Gita, and I am going to give you more information about this as we move on. In terms of structure, okay, we are looking at, in terms of number of pages, this translation that I have right here is 86 pages long. It is divided into 18 chapters. Okay, all of the editions, or most of the editions at least, of the Bhagavad Gita have 18 chapters. Each chapter, I would say, is maybe about 4 or 5 pages in length, just to give you an idea of how long these individual parts are. And then each chapter also contains a series or a number of verses. You're going to find maybe 20-something, 30-something, 40-something verses. Very rarely are you going to find less than 20 or more than 50. Though there can be some of the chapters are shorter than usual, and then the last chapter, the 18th chapter, is rather longer than the previous ones. And when it comes to the material presented, I would say that the structure is that of a framed dialogue. Okay, there's going to be more to come on what I mean by that framed dialogue. But before we look at that, let's look at the contents here. So I want to start with the beginning of the poem. Okay, I think that's probably the best way to start to look at any text. And the poem begins as a dialogue between Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya. So Dhritarashtra asks Sanjaya to tell him the story of Arjuna when he found himself in the field of battle facing his enemies. So the reason why I called it a framed narrative is because this dialogue, strictly speaking, between Dhritarashtra and Sanjaya is not really that important to the story itself. What we have here is basically a couple of characters who are only presenting the story. The important dialogue is the one that takes place between Arjuna and Krishna. Many names are evoked, you're going to see in this first chapter. lots and lots of names. And because of that, I thought of the second chapter of the Iliad when we get all of those names of all the warriors who were present in the battle. This is not as extreme as that second chapter of the Iliad, but there are quite a few names. And the question you may have is, are you not supposed to avoid that as a narrator or as a storyteller? Do not, overload the reader with so many names at the beginning. Don't worry about it, just keep reading, okay? The names are in a way not important. They are supposed to present us with some context of what happened there. And by the way, the Mahabharata, the battles that are evoked or narrated in that book, they are historical, okay? So there is a way to read the Mahabharata as a literal, history of events that happened, but the Bhagavad Gita is a little bit different from that, okay? That's when allegory comes in. So we have at the very beginning Arjuna's dilemma. Okay, the story really gets started when Arjuna goes to the battlefield and he faces the opposing army, and he sees that in that army that he's about to engage in battle with, he finds many of his friends, many of his family members, teachers that he had, and he's like, I can't do this, okay? I can't just, go into battle with these people that are so close to me. And that is his dilemma. And one of the reasons why this is so striking is because Arjuna is a warrior. So you could say it's his very nature to fight, okay? Here's a fighter who's saying all of a sudden, I cannot do this. I cannot fight. So it is nothing short of an existential crisis, what he experiences at this point. And let me share with you how he reacts to this. So as I said before, the Bhagavad Gita is divided into chapters and then verses. So I'm going to give you the chapter number and the verse number every time that I quote from here. So we are now looking at chapter 1, verse 45. And he says, O day of darkness, what evil spirit moved our minds when for the sake of an earthly kingdom we came to this field of battle ready to kill our own people. Better for me indeed if the sons of Dhritarashtra with arms in hand found me unarmed, unresisting, and killed me in the struggle of war. So you can tell how bad he feels about this situation that he finds himself in. So in comes Krishna and responds to him in a way to, help him deal with this situation. Krishna is the other major character, along with Arjuna, of the poem, and he is an avatar. He's an incarnation of Vishnu, so he is a divine being. He's having this dialogue with one of the many manifestations of God, basically. And Krishna says to Arjuna, you have to fight. You just have to. And he gives him 3 main reasons at this point. And then there's a 4th reason that is added later on in the poem. So I'm going to give you the 3 reasons and the 4th one also, just so that we have that little bit of a situation, what Arjuna is facing here. First reason why Krishna says you have to fight is because there is really, actually no death. Okay, the soul is immortal. So don't worry, that's the first reason. The second one is you have a duty to fulfill. Each one of us has. And you just have to do it. Okay, this is your duty. You're a warrior. You have to fight. And then the third reason, which I thought was very interesting, was almost in the form of a question. What would people say? Okay, you're a fighter. You're there facing the enemy, and all of a sudden you say, "I can't fight." No, what are people going to say about you? The 4th reason that I was mentioning before, which is provided later on in the poem, is a very simple one, and that is namely karma. Okay, Krishna says in a nutshell, and I'm always paraphrasing here, these people who may die in this battle, they are supposed to die. It's their karma. Okay, that is almost like the way it is written. It has to happen. And Arjuna, you are only the means through which that will come about. So it's really, in a way, not his own action. It is his own action, but in a way he is fulfilling or carrying out the designs of karma. You see what I mean? It's a very complex situation. But that's the 4th argument that Krishna offers as a way of saying, you do have to fight. And then after trying to convince Arjuna that he is supposed to fight, what Krishna does is that he begins to impart the knowledge and the wisdom, actually, of yoga. An important thing to keep in mind here when it comes to yoga is the literal meaning of the word, which is to unite. Okay, and we're going to come back to that. I was saying before, when I was kind of introducing this text, that there are many different ways that you can read the Gita. I have read it many times, and this last time what I wanted to do is I wanted to focus on it as a love story. There is definitely a way that you can read the Gita as a love story. So speaking of union, speaking of yoga, union, this is definitely a way that you can read the Bhagavad Gita as a love story in which the two lovers are the same. They are one and the same, okay? Because the lovers here are Brahman, God, and Atman, the individual soul. And by the way, there are many ways to translate those terms, but I'm just choosing the ones that are the most direct for us. So these lovers, God and the individual soul, Brahman and Atman, are actually made of the same substance. That's why I was saying that in a sense the Bhagavad Gita is a love story in which the two lovers are one and the same. Because Atman is the spark of Brahman that lives in each person. According to the Hindu worldview, that is the way it is. So each one of us has basically that spark of God that we call Atman, and Brahman is God himself. So basically, the lover and the beloved are the same. It's just that they have become separated. Because of that, the soul goes through a process that involves sometimes many, many incarnations until it is ready to be united with God. So from this worldview, in this frame, right, the purpose of life is to look for and to work towards that union with God, and that is the nature of yoga and the meaning of the word yoga. So as you can imagine, this is a very complex text, even though it is a very slim volume. As I said before, we're talking about 86 pages, but it is incredibly rich. So how do we approach a text like this one? I thought I would focus on three main concepts or three central themes, and then I would give you some information about other important parts or chapters that I found to be memorable. Not because the number 3 is magical or anything like that, but it's just a very convenient number. So the first theme that I wanted to explore in the context of the Bhagavad Gita is probably the most important one, or the one that most people cite most of the time as the main topic or the main theme of this text, which is the concept of duty. To do one's duty, according to the Bhagavad Gita, is wisdom, and the enemy of wisdom is desire. So keep in mind those two elements right there, wisdom and desire. And when it comes to duty, it's as Shakespeare put it, all the world's a stage and we are players. This is basically God's big drama of existence, and each one of us has a part to play in that drama. In the case of Arjuna, it happens to be the part of a warrior, right? Each one of us has a part to play. I'm a teacher, okay, so that's what I have to do. That is my part in this vast and immense drama of existence. And just like actors, we have to give the best performance that we possibly can. That is our duty. That's the actor's pride and the fulfillment of his or her role. The material world, which we are pretty much caught in, is an illusion. In terms of Hindu philosophy, it is called Maya, right? So we have this illusion. That's where we're not supposed to pay too much attention to the physical world, according always to this worldview. I want to share a quote with you from chapter 3, and this is going to be verse number 42 and 43. So this is what we have. They say that the power of the senses is great, but greater than the senses is the mind. Greater than the mind is buddhi, reason, and greater than reason is he, the spirit in man and in all. Know him therefore who is above reason, and let his peace give thee peace. Be a warrior and kill desire, the powerful enemy of the soul. So be a warrior and kill desire. By that you can tell what I mean, or what I meant before when I said that this is an allegory. Okay, he is fighting desire, which is the enemy of the soul. That is in a way what composes the opposing army. If you look at this text from an allegorical perspective and not just from a literal meaning. The second central theme that I wanted to explore is the idea of seeing the divine in all. This is something that if you read the Gita, you're going to find it stressed throughout the text. I mentioned before that the meaning of yoga was to unite, right? That is what it means also to see the divine in all. Seeing the divine in all is really of paramount importance. This is one of the central tenets, it's one of the central realizations that we have to come to. And there's a quote that supports that. If we go to chapter 13, and this would be verse 30, it says, when a man sees that the infinity of various beings is abiding in the one, and is an evolution from the one, then he becomes one with Brahman. So you can tell just by that quote how important this is. How does one person become one with Brahma, it is when he or she realizes, truly realizes, that all comes from God and that we are all parts of that huge, source of power and of life and of so many other things, right? That all abides in the one and that comes from the one. There's another quote here earlier than that also gives us an idea as to the same issue that we have here, and that is chapter 6, verse 30. It says, "And when he sees me in all and he sees all in me, then I never leave him and he never leaves me. He who in this oneness of love loves me in whatever he sees, wherever this man may live, in truth this man lives in me." Notice how it is emphasized the concept of love, right? That's why I was saying you can totally read the Gita as a love poem, because the concept of love comes so many times, and you're going to find it in so many of these verses throughout the entire text. And finally, the third central theme or topic that I wanted to kind of dwell upon a little bit is the difference between renunciation and surrender. Okay, as you may know, there are many faith systems that oppose action. This idea of action without action sometimes. Wei Wu Wei, for instance, in Taoism. Do nothing and nothing will be not done. Okay? Well, Hinduism is different from that, and the Gita actually says that we should do good deeds. Okay? And the author of the Gita made a distinction between renunciation and surrender in chapter 18 that I really, really like. So, according to the Gita, once again, we should do good deeds, right? But we should not take credit for the result of that work. In other words, we should do the good deeds, but we should not claim a reward for that work. And that is what is meant by surrender. That is not renunciation, but it is surrender. Renunciation means not engaging in selfish works, not doing things for selfish motives. Surrender is superior to that because basically you are carrying out works and they are good works, but you're saying, I am offering this to God. I am not expecting a reward from this. So that's why surrender is a more important, it's kind of like a superior path, if you will. As I was reading this, I thought maybe, okay, this is a little bit similar to that Ignatian motto, AMDG, right? Ad maiorem Dei gloriam, all to the greater glory of God. It's not exactly the same thing, but you have there maybe a point of affinity between the Hinduism of the Gita and Ignatian spirituality in the Christian world. I also wanted to mention, as I said before, now that we have looked at those three main concepts or main ideas, some other passages or chapters that I found to be important or worthy of notice. The first one that I liked was chapter 2. Okay, chapter 2 is includes, towards the end, an exaltation of serenity. And as I was reading that, I was reminded of many verses from that other great text, which is a Buddhist text, not a Hindu one, the Dhammapada. Okay, there's a lot there that has, there's a connection between many ideas between the Gita and the Dhammapada, especially in the second half of chapter 2. Chapter 9 I also found to be memorable, in which Krishna explains who he is. So what we have here is basically a description of the nature of God. As far as it is possible to do something like that with words, you can imagine how difficult something like that might be. How do you describe God in words? So many statements in this chapter 9 are actually going to sound quite familiar to Christians. And if you ask me, at least, that is not surprising at all. I also liked chapter 11, okay? And this one is about Arjuna's mystical experience. At one point in this chapter 11, Arjuna beholds the divine in all its immensity and all its complexity. So I think this is one of those chapters in which the Gita reaches those, famous heights of poetry that we speak about. Chapter 16 is also one of my favorites because, for the most part throughout the Gita, Krishna speaks of virtue and heaven. But in chapter 16, he actually talks a little bit about sin and hell, which I think is very, very interesting. And sin is basically identified with delusion. In a way, in other words, sin is probably like the worst form of insanity because it is not actually thinking right. And another thing that I like about this chapter is that Krishna talks about the 3 gates of hell. And the 3 gates of hell are lust, wrath, and greed. Do those sound familiar? Those are definitely familiar, especially to Christians because of the 7 deadly sins and all that. So those are the 3 gates of hell according to the Bhagavad Gita. And then, of course, other than those chapters that I mentioned, please look out for the ending of the poem. I especially thought that Arjuna's last words were beautiful. So the ending is really, memorable and just quite inspiring and uplifting. So that's one of the reasons why many people like to read this as a separate text, even though it is part of the Mahabharata, because it is a complete thing. Okay, it's not that you're reading just one section of the Mahabharata that is taken out of context. This is really a complete text, if you ask me. In the introduction to this video, at the very beginning, I promised you a Borges connection. There is a Borges connection, and most of the time there is a Borges connection. But here the connection is quite good. It's quite strong, because actually what happened is that Borges included the Gita in his Biblioteca Personal. So his selection of the most important, the most memorable, the most significant books that he had read in his entire life. And he actually put together that Biblioteca Personal towards the end of his life. So it's not like he did this when he was young and then he read more things. Nothing of that. Actually, he passed away while he was writing the prologues and putting together the list. So we have only a partial list of the texts that he would have included in this great collection. Now, in his prologue, he did write the prologue about the Gita. And unfortunately, I will say he doesn't really give us that much. Okay, he basically summarizes the poem, then he mentions a few main themes of it. But, there are a couple of sentences that I thought were worth sharing with you, and that's what I want to do. So he says, this is Borges speaking, the author's name is unknown. Hindus attribute their works to a divinity, a sect, a character in the fable, or simply to time, a feasible hypothesis that alarms the erudites. And then later on in this prologue he says, a passage of this poem that affirms the equality of contraries has been imitated by Emerson and by Charles Baudelaire. And then finally he says, it is curious that an apology of war should come to us from India. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 6 schools of Hindu philosophy converge. I particularly stopped when I was reading at that line right there. It is curious that an apology of war should come to us from India. And that is the little part of Borges' introduction that I wanted to stop at a little bit, just briefly here. I feel that it needs some comment. I honestly think, I like to think, and I want to believe, and I seriously, honestly believe that Jorge Luis Borges was being tongue-in-cheek when he said that, okay? I don't think the Bhagavad Gita is an apology of war. Actually, Borges is not the first to have said that, and he is not the only person to have said that. But I think it is obvious if you look at the text from the very beginning that this is meant to be allegorical. Just the first line of it, okay? If you go to chapter 1, verse 1, it says, on the field of truth, on the battlefield of life, what came to pass, Sanjaya, when my sons and their warriors faced those of my brother Pandu. So we have the field of truth, the battlefield of life. This is not a physical, literal battlefield, but the battlefield of life. And this is actually reinforced if you look at chapter 13, by the very first line of that chapter 2, where it says, this is Krishna speaking here. This body, Arjuna, is called the field. He who knows this is called the knower of the field. So the field is another word for the body in this case. They are drawing a parallel between that, and the enemy would be desire. So I think, Borges could not have read the Bhagavad Gita and not have realized that this is an allegory. But I still wanted to comment on that because I think it was interesting. And by the way, as you know, if you have read Borges, he was quite a joker sometimes in some of the things that he said. So especially if you read conversations with other people, between Borges and somebody else, you can tell this. I wanted to give you some information about a couple of editions, which are the 2 editions that I have of the Bhagavad Gita. As you can imagine, there are many, many, many editions of this great text, but this is the one that I experienced first, which is the one that is a part of the Penguin Classics. It features a translation by Juan Mascaró, which is very interesting because his first language was Spanish. So, speaker of Spanish translating from Sanskrit into English, and the result is honestly just quite beautiful. What he wanted to do with this one, as he says in his translator's note, is this. He says, the aim of this translation is to give without notes or commentary the spiritual message of the Bhagavad Gita in pure English. And that's exactly what you get, okay? I love this translation because it is direct and it is inspiring. I found this many years ago at my university's bookstore. I was not supposed to buy this. I have no idea what I was there to buy, and I saw it and I was like, wow, I really like this book. I had heard of the Gita, of course. This is a good time to get a copy of, just for me, and to read it. And when I went to the place, to pay for this book, the girl who was there, she said, oh, I love this book, and I really like the edition that Yogananda put together. I was like, wow, I could not believe it, because of course I knew who Paramahansa Yogananda was, and I had known for a very long time. So I thought it was amazing that I found this book there in the first place, and that the girl who was there taking care of the cash register had read it and knew about other editions of this book. So I thought that was very, very, kind of like, I took it as a good sign. Let me just put it that way. And this is, of course, the other edition that I have, which is exactly the one put together, translated and commented by Paramahansa Yogananda. I've got the paperback edition, so not the hardcover. There's a really nice hardcover edition, but this is the paperback. It's 2 volumes. It's just an astonishing work of exegesis. It goes line by line. It amounts to more than 1,000 pages. So it's really wonderful. And it's also easy to navigate, okay, because it has a lot of subtitles and subheadings that kind of highlight the major themes. So what I would say is, if you're new to the Gita and you just want a direct text that gives you the heart of the poem or of the sacred text or the love story, or however you choose to read it, then go with this one. And then if you're looking for something more like something deeper and something like more of a study or a commentary, then this is a very good edition to get. So those are just 2 of the many editions that you can find of the Bhagavad Gita. Bottom line now, okay? If you told me, okay, if you said, okay, Jorge, just name 10 works, 10 books that changed your life, just like that changed your life, the Gita would, without a doubt, I do not have to think twice, make the list. Okay, I can tell you definitely. I love sacred texts, and I have read sacred texts from all of the major faith systems that I can think of, but reading the Gita or the Bible or the sutras as sacred texts, if you ask me, is only one of the many options that you have. It's the option that I prefer, and it's the one that I would probably encourage you to try. But, besides the fact that this is a very powerful sacred text, it is also an amazing work of poetry. So that is another way in which you can read it if, let's say, you're not interested in spiritual reading or something that you would call by a similar name. So in any case, I would love to hear your thoughts on the Gita, on what it means to you, if you have read it, or any experiences that you have had with similar texts, because this is definitely one of the most important books that I have ever read, and that's why I wanted to do this video. Do you have any questions, comments, recommendations, recipes? Just let me know. As you know, I'm always happy to read them and to respond to them, so I'm here and I'm listening. Just let me know. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.